Hey everyone, in today's episode, we are tackling the question, would you kill one innocent person to save a million others? Picture this for a second. You're standing next to a railway switch, and there's a runaway train barreling down the tracks at full speed. Ahead on the main track, there are a million people who have no idea what's coming. They're going to die unless you do something. But here's the catch. You can pull a lever and divert the train to a side track where there's just one person. One innocent person is going to die if you pull that lever. So what do? Do you actively choose to kill that one person to save a million others? Or do you let the train continue and allow a million people to die while keeping your hands clean? I want you to do something. Pause this video right now and think about what you would do. Think about it. Would you pull that lever? There's no right or wrong answer here, but your gut reaction is going to tell you something important about how you approach ethics. Go ahead, I'll wait. Okay, now that you've thought about it, let's explore why this question has been tormenting philosophers, ethicists, and regular people like us for centuries, and what your answer might reveal about the way you see the world. This question isn't just some academic exercise that professors use to torture philosophy students. It shows up everywhere in our real world, and understanding it can help us navigate some of the most difficult decisions we face as individuals and as a society. Think about it. During the COVID-19 pandemic, governments had to decide how to allocate limited medical resources. Should a hospital prioritize treating 5 patients with a moderate chance of survival, or focus all its resources on 1 patient with a slightly better chance? Military leaders face similar dilemmas when they have to decide whether to sacrifice a small unit to save a larger force. Even something as seemingly simple as programming a self-driving car involves these kinds of ethical calculations. If the car's AI detects an unavoidable accident, should it prioritize the safety of its passenger or the pedestrians? These aren't hypothetical scenarios. They're real decisions that affect real lives every single day. To really understand this dilemma, we need to look at it through the lens of different philosophical traditions that have been wrestling with these questions for thousands of years. The first major approach is called utilitarianism, and it's probably the most intuitive way to think about this problem. Utilitarians believe that the right action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It's all about maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering across everyone affected by your decision. From this perspective, the math seems pretty straightforward. 1 life versus a million lives means you should pull that lever. The utilitarian would say that failing to act would be incredibly selfish and short-sighted because you're allowing massive suffering to occur just so you can feel better about keeping your hands clean. But here's where it gets much more complicated. There's another major school of thought called deontological ethics, which was famously developed by the philosopher Immanuel Kant. Deontologists believe that some actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of their consequences. They argue that there are fundamental moral rules that we should never break, even if breaking them might lead to better outcomes. From this perspective, deliberately killing an innocent person is always wrong, no matter how many lives it might save. The deontologists would argue that the moment you decide to actively kill someone, you're treating them as a mere tool to achieve your goal, and that violates their fundamental dignity as a human being. They'd say that there's a crucial moral difference between killing someone and allowing them to die, even if the result is the same. Let me give you a concrete example to illustrate this difference. Imagine you're a doctor in an emergency room, and 5 patients are brought in who desperately need organ transplants to survive. You also have 1 healthy patient who came in for a routine checkup. A utilitarian might argue that you should kill the healthy patient and distribute their organs to save the 5 others. After all, 5 lives are worth more than 1, right? But I'm betting that idea makes you deeply uncomfortable, and that's your deontological intuition kicking in. Even though the math is the same as the train scenario, something feels fundamentally different about actively killing someone versus allowing a death to occur. This distinction between killing and letting die is one of the most hotly debated topics in moral philosophy. Now let's complicate this even further, because philosophy loves to make our heads spin. What if that one person on the track isn't a random stranger? What if it's your best friend, your sibling, or your child? Does that change your calculation? Most people would say yes, but why? Are we being illogical and emotional, or is there something deeper going on here? Some philosophers argue that we have special moral obligations to the people closest to us, and that it's not just acceptable, but morally required to prioritize their well-being over strangers. Others argue that this kind of thinking is exactly what leads to tribalism, discrimination, and injustice on a massive scale. There's also the question of certainty. In our thought experiment, we're assuming that pulling the lever will save 1,000,000 lives and kill one person. But real life is never that clean. What if there's only a 90% chance that pulling the lever will save those 1,000,000 people? What about 50%? Where do you draw the line? And what if you don't know anything about the people involved? What if one person is a brilliant scientist on the verge of curing cancer and the other 1,000,000 people are all convicted criminals? These variations might seem like they're missing the point, but they highlight how complex moral reasoning becomes when we move from abstract principles to messy reality. Let me share something that might blow your mind. This entire dilemma becomes even more interesting when we consider the psychology behind our moral intuitions. Researchers have found that most people will say they'd pull the lever in the original trolley problem, but they won't push a large person off a bridge to stop the train. Even though the moral logic is identical, you're still sacrificing one life to save many others. The difference seems to be that pulling a lever feels indirect and impersonal, while pushing someone feels direct and personal. This suggests that our moral intuitions aren't just based on logical reasoning, but are deeply influenced by emotional and psychological factors that we're not always aware of. This brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of this dilemma. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that our moral intuitions aren't always consistent or logical. We like to think of ourselves as rational beings who make decisions based on clear principles, but the truth is that our moral reasoning is often driven by emotions, cultural conditioning, and cognitive biases that we don't even realize we have. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Emotions like empathy and compassion are often crucial guides to moral behavior, but it does mean that we need to be more thoughtful and self-aware about how we make ethical decisions. Speaking of real-world applications, let's talk about how this dilemma shows up in some of the most cutting-edge technology of our time. When engineers are programming autonomous vehicles, they're coding ethical decisions into algorithms. If a self-driving car's sensors detect an imminent crash, should it prioritize protecting its passengers or the pedestrians? Should it swerve to avoid hitting children, even if it means hitting adults? Should it consider the age, health, or social status of potential victims? These might sound like science fiction scenarios, but they're questions that programmers are grappling with right now as these technologies become mainstream. The same ethical framework applies to artificial intelligence more broadly. As AI systems become more sophisticated and are given more decision-making power, we need to think carefully about what moral principles we want to embed in them. Should an AI system managing hospital resources prioritize patients based purely on their likelihood of survival? Or should it also consider factors like age, quality of life, or social contribution? These aren't just technical questions, they're profound moral questions that will shape the kind of society we live in. Even in our personal lives, we face scaled-down versions of this dilemma all the time. When you're deciding how to spend your money, time, or energy, you're essentially making calculations about how to do the most good. Should you donate money to help one person in your community, or to an organization that can help thousands of people in developing countries? Should you spend your weekend volunteering at a local shelter, or should you use that time to advance your career so you can earn more money to donate later? These decisions might not involve life and death, but they're based on the same underlying moral reasoning. Here's what I find most fascinating about this whole question. It doesn't have a right answer. I know that might be frustrating to hear, especially if you came here looking for a clear solution to this moral puzzle. But the real value isn't in finding the one correct answer. It's in wrestling with the question itself. What's beautiful about this question is that it reveals something about human nature. The fact that this dilemma is so agonizing, the fact that it keeps us up at night and makes us question everything we think we know about right and wrong, shows that we're moral beings who care deeply about doing the right thing. Even if we disagree about what the right thing is, the fact that we're troubled by these questions is evidence of our shared humanity and our common desire to live ethical lives. So what would you do? After everything we've discussed, the utilitarian calculations, the deontological principles, the real-world complications, and the psychological factors that influence our decisions, would you pull that lever? I genuinely want to know what you think, and more importantly, I want to know why you think it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, but don't just tell me your answer, tell me your reasoning. What moral principles are you drawing on? What factors are most important to you? Are there any aspects of this dilemma that I didn't cover that you think are crucial? This conversation doesn't end with this video. These are the kinds of questions that we need to keep discussing as individuals, as communities, and as a society. The moral challenges we face are only going to get more complex as technology advances and the world becomes more interconnected. By thinking through these difficult questions now, we're preparing ourselves to make better decisions when the stakes are real and the pressure is on. If you found this deep dive into moral philosophy as fascinating as I do, I'd love it if you could hit that like button to let me know. And if you want to see more videos like this one, explorations of big questions that challenge us to think more deeply about life, ethics, and what it means to be human, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. I'm planning to tackle some other mind-bending philosophical questions in upcoming videos, including whether we have free will, what it means to live a good life, and how we can know if our moral beliefs are correct. Trust me, you won't want to miss those discussions. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, and remember that the most important conversations are often the most uncomfortable ones. Thanks for joining me on this journey into one of philosophy's most challenging questions, and I'll see you in the next video.